Thanks, Victor, for that. Otherwise, I would have missed this whole thing. Yeah, the purpose is of my book. Oh, someone else has come. Someone is 2020. I don't know who's that, but I'm admitting it. The purpose of the book, what I call Banyan wine, is that according to me, and from what I have read, most of the religion has got one base. Just like the banyan tree spreads into the branches, that's what I want to portray in my book. That most of the religions of the world basically has one story to tell, but everyone has same destiny, and that's how different religions have come up. And we, of course, went through the flood and Noah's children. How I said that Noah's children became gods in most of the places. And today we want to discuss mostly on the Indian side. I would be taking up how the religion started in India. What is the oldest history here? Someone's mic is on.
Santosh,
Can we?
Santosh,
I think you have
Santosh,
to
can you
mute
mute?
everyone. You have to mute everyone, I think.
Okay, I'll mute it. Okay, I got it. So we are starting from the religious practices in India, when they came, which are the major ones, and what inspired them. And this is not something which I have picked up on my own. I have done a lot of research. I've read a lot of books. I downloaded a lot of old history books, and which I will show you in this presentation. And this information is got from there. Basically, all this information. This front screen, what you see, is basically a story which is from the Exodus, and many of our folks are not doesn't know this story. I don't know if does anyone know about this story. You can just say, just raise your hand. Have you heard about the story of Moses and the snakes? This story appears in Exodus actually, and
We heard about that. They made a snake and they worshipped the.
No, they made the cow, right?
No.
now cow is
Snake,
different.
right?
The snake is also there.
Snake and yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, then the people who looked at the serpent, they survived.
Yes, exactly. That's the story, and that's what is written here on my statement. That serpent that God ordered Moses to mount onto the pole, so that the people could get forgiveness by looking at the snake. Now, I really don't understand the whole thing, but I'll try to explain how much I can. It is a very complicating thing which is there in our Old Testament. I always say our Old Testament is very complicated. Some of the stories you really need to get into depth to understand them. Okay, here we have another slide where I'm putting a slide which refers the statement which God has made in the Old Testament, which compares to Jesus on the cross, basically. This statement is from Matthew, basically, the chapter of Matthew, where Jesus tells, if I had told you earthly things and you don't believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? This is what Jesus is telling when Jesus was asked about heaven. Jesus said, you don't believe what I'm telling you about the earthly things, and you want me to tell you about the heavenly things. That means many things of heaven man cannot understand. It's beyond our understanding, beyond our imagination. And that's the reason Jesus did not want us to tell anything about heaven, because it's beyond our comprehension. We cannot even imagine what the creator and the creation is. And here I have a small picture of John 3:14, where he says, as Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And that's the saying from Matthews too. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. This is a statement which Jesus is making to his disciples before he sends them out to go and preach his word to the Gentiles. Basically, this statement comes from Jesus after his death. Anyone in the middle want to ask something? Surely get ahead. This is not just a one way. I would like to make it a sort of an interaction too, and that is fun. There are times, I'm not saying I'm totally right, but let's make it an interactive. So your ideas,
So,
my ideas, we can put it. Sometimes I may be wrong. I can put your ideas in.
so Glady, in the Exodus, God actually cursed the serpent because serpent actually tempted Eve to commit sin, basically. I mean, to go against God. And then,
You're talking about the Garden of Eden.
yeah, the Garden of Eden, correct. Yeah.
That's not
So God
Exodus.
cursed the serpent, right? I mean, a serpent, and said that, you'll go on your belly and you'll be striking at the feet of whatever human being actually. But then, how are we actually using the same snake in for Moses? And again, this thing. I mean, once that God curses it, the other side, I'm just confused.
Matthew, the word snake is not there in the Hebrew version. The
Okay.
same way, like apple is not there in the Hebrew version, the word snake is not there.
Okay.
Now, it's only an assumption by all Christians and the people who wrote the book immediately in the starting that they have put a snake there. Nor is Satan's
Uh,
name mentioned, nor a snake there. So that's the confusion. But God,
okay.
in the Genesis, it is written that thou shalt go on your belly and all that. So we all
Yeah.
presume it is the snake or the reptile.
Mhm.
So we don't. That
Okay.
is a thing for real debate. We really don't know. And this is the story which I'm showing you here: the serpent and his meaning. When the Israelites complained against God and Moses, God sent poisonous snakes among them, and many people died. The people repented and pleaded with Moses to ask God for help. God instructed Moses to make a serpent of bronze and set it on a pole. And anyone who was bitten by a snake could look at the bronze serpent and be healed. Moses did as God commanded. And this statue, which you say, which is this is the one. One we call it the rod of Asclepius, and Caduceus is another one where you have two snakes rotating around a pole, and then you have a dove in the top, basically a wing at the top. This has a meaning. Basically, if you see this bronze serpent was meant to remind the Israelites of the cause of their sin. It was meant to carry their minds back to the Garden of Eden. Now, God is connecting this with the Garden of Eden. And here too, it looks like a snake, like how Matthew said, but the initial word of snake was not there. But all the indications are there, it was a snake. Where Satan came in the form of a serpent to tempt their first parents. The punishment for the sin brought into the world through the temptation of that serpent of old was laid on the cross, Jesus at the cross. The penalty for our sin fell on him. He became sin for us that we might become the righteous of God in him. So this symbol basically today is taken into the medical science. What do you call this Caduceus picture which you see on the right? Even the left one is taken, but mostly it's the right one which is taken. The symbol of the snake wrapped around a staff is still used today as a representation of medicine and healthcare. Because God said anyone who was bitten by a snake, you look at it and will be cured. That's the reason the medical science took this as their emblem, known as the rod of Achilles, and after the Greek god of healing. Now, I just want to give a small timeline of how the Indian religion came into India, which religions were there. The oldest religion theologians think in India should have been the Naga dynasty and what we call pagan worship. There was a lot of pagan worship in India, and there is no written history much of the pagan. Even the Naga dynasty, the dynasty started very late, but there was snake worship in India even before Buddhism. The estimate of the Naga dynasty is between 600 BC. That means it is even before Alexander to 500 AD, after death. And the word Naga is inspired from the Hebrew word Nakash. The original worshippers of the snake basically migrated from Sudan, Ethiopia, and Nubia. Basically, our forefathers, like I said before, we are the children of Ham. And they migrated into India to southern India many years back. Now, we really don't have any dates there. That is, maybe it's 2600, 2800. Those are the time when Ham and Cush and all were all alive. what do you call the land of Ham and Kush, the Kushites, to the land we call today India and Sri Lanka. Remember, there was no names for India and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was known as Naga Nadu. That means the land of snakes. The other religion which came very early was Jainism and Buddhism. Both came at the same time almost. Mahavira was born very close to this period, 500 BC, and to 300 AD. That we have Jainism. According to them, Rishabhadeva is the first Tirthankara. They have 17 Tirthankaras. Like we have prophets, they have 17 of them. The first one is Rishabhadeva. And you got to understand who is Rishabhadeva. The word Rishab means the bull. Deva is the king, the bull king. Basically, Rishabhadeva is their first Tirthankara, and Mahavira was like Buddha. He did not attain Buddhism. Buddha is not a name. Buddha is a state of mind which you can achieve in Buddhism. The highest state which you can achieve in mind in Buddhism is Buddha. That means you have attained that knowledge. Buddhism was between 520 BC and 1200 AD. This is, I am giving a date not of the age of the person, but the books were written between 1 BC and 1200 AD. Buddha was born between 520 or something like that. And how do we know that? Because there is a Tibetan script in China. The Indians did not know the birth date of Buddhism, but that script in China had the date of his birth in Lumbini, basically. Lumbini was his mother's name also. There were 27 Buddhas. Gautam Buddha is supposed to be the 27th Buddha. And his name is not Gautama. His name is different. I will tell you in the... it is written Buddha, Gautam in only Sanskrit, but in Pali language, he has a different name. His real name was not Gautama. Then we have the Zoroastrians. Basically, this came in from Persia, but it came into India between 600 AD and 1200 AD. They have a prophet called Zoroaster. Basically, he was also born between that time in Persia, which is modern day Iran. But it follows an old religion, which is 1400 years BC in Persia, in Sumeria. Basically, they used to worship the god Ashur. And that's the reason their god is Ashura Mazda. And I'll tell you who is Ashur later on. And this is where my connection of Noah comes in, Ashur. Ashur is the grandson of Noah, basically. Then come Hinduism and Vedic religion. Now, there is a lot of information which you need to know in Hinduism and Vedism. We'll have to do multiple presentation, and I'll do that later on. But I'll give you a short idea. Basically, this religion, it is a little controversial subject. Hinduism, there is no word called Hinduism. This is a new name. There is no word called Vedic. They call themselves Sanatan, but the word Sanatan is a Buddhist word. And that also doesn't turn to this. The word Hindu comes from the Persians. The Persians gave the name Hindustan and Hinduism, basically. Most of their books were written from the 8th century to the 14th century. And you may be wondering if there is any Hindu here, he may get upset. But they really don't have any originals of their books. The only original of their book is the Rig Veda, that also only 32 manuscripts. It is lying in the Pune Bhandarkar Institute. It was sent to UNESCO for carbon dating, and UNESCO gave them a carbon dating of 1467. 1467 is here, 14th century. And it was written on paper. So you can imagine when paper was invented. And 32, from the 32 manuscripts, 31 was on paper and one was on bark, that is your tree branch. So we'll get into this later on. According to my and many other books which I'll show, how I've got the information from, basically it starts with 800 AD to 1400 AD. Christianity came in 52 AD, as all of you know. St. Thomas lands in Calicut. But he comes via Sindh, modern day Sindh. And how do we know he came via Sindh? Because that information is there in the Malankara churches in Kerala. The Acts of the Apostles don't record St. Thomas's travels, but most of the information of St. Thomas is there in the Malankara records in Kerala. He comes via Afghanistan into Pakistan, today modern day Pakistan, and he mentions the king Gondophares. Historians ignored the Christians' stories of St. Thomas, saying there was no king called Gondophares. But in 1948, they dug up some coins in Pakistan near the Harappa, and they found coins belonging to the king Gondophares. And that's how they were convinced that what was written in St. Thomas's stories were correct. He came through Gondophares with a Jewish trader called Rabban. He brings him to India. So Christianity comes in the 52nd AD. And Islam comes very late. Islam comes in the 10th century. Muhammad bin Qasim invades Raja Dhir in Sindh in 780. He was defeated. Then he comes back. He doesn't come, he gets killed, but the other Arabs come. And it's only after the 10th century that they started slowly bringing Islam inside. But even the Islamic books were not written. Most of the hadiths were written in the 14th and the 15th century. So most of the religions were written between 14th and 15th century. The Buddhist books were written in the 1st century. The Tripitaka and all that were written between the 1st, 2nd, and the 3rd century. Jainism also, their Tirthankaras were written between 2nd century. And of course, Christianity also was written in the, of course, Mark, Luke, they wrote it in the 1st century. Mark, Luke, and Matthew's last in the 90 AD was written by John. What you call the Revelation was written that time. So we have all that information, but we don't have anything on written on this the religion called the Naga dynasty, and that's what I want to talk today. I'm just giving some history on Noah after the flood. Noah was known by different names in Greeks. Remember, most of the religion we have today in India comes from two places, from Sumerians, from the Mesopotamian area, and mostly comes from the Greeks. All the gods which we are worshipping today in India, when I say I'm not saying the Christians, I'm saying the Vedic gods, are basically from Greek history. Like I told before, Rishabhadeva is also known as the bull. And why was he called the bull? Because of the Urarat mountains. In Sumerian language, it was called Urarat, but in English, it is the Ararat Mountains. They are a range of mountains in the Taurus Mountains range, basically. That's the reason it was associated that he was a man from the Taurus mountain range. So he was always associated with the bull. So some of the old statues of where they worshipped Noah in the form of other gods like Janus and all that, they had forms. Here are some things. I won't go through everything. I just want to go through some important ones. There's definitely the influence of Noah's story in the Indian religion. The earliest Indian valley civilization were in trade with Sumeria and was known as Meluha. That's the wrong spelling. Meluka is written here, but it's Meluha. How do we know that the Sumerians were dealing with India? Because on their tablets, I couldn't put the picture here, but in sometime in the next presentation, I'll show you the picture where in Sumerian language, they mentions the land of Meluha, which they trade with. The land of Meluha is actually in modern day Pakistan, which we call the Harappa and the area around Gujarat. There was not only Harappa, there were many civilization at that time. Dilmun was another place which we call Bahrain today. It's also called Dilmun. The Sumerians used to call it Dilmun. And the stories of from Sumeria were influencing the latter due to trade and it's shown in the artifacts found in Harappa. Some of the letters written in Harappa stones resemble the same writing in Sumerian languages. And I will show that in a later stage because I wouldn't want to involve all that in this, other the subject will change. By this time, the Sumerians too had a vague mouth-to-mouth version of the incident, what happened during the time of Noah. That means they heard from their forefathers the story of Noah and made their own interpretation of the religion like the bull. And after the time of Nimrod, the worship of the sun and the moon was started. And I think I explained before in one of my presentation how Nimrod dies and how his wife Semiramis compares him to the sun and how she was impregnated by the rays of the sun, and Temur was born, basically. The earliest gods which are mentioned is El, A, Enki, and Asur. Now, El, the word God El, is there in our Bible also. We have Elohim. Oh, there is another person in English. Okay. We have Elohim. These word El was known as the word for God was known as El in olden Sumeria. Even the Israelites used to call God by Yel. That is the reason even the word Allah comes from this word El. El ilaha. That means the God. This is not a name of God. Remember what God told Moses, you shall not know my name. God said it is very holy, I will not take your name. And according to Jewish scriptures, you cannot take God's name in one word. Yahweh is also said in two words. Yahweh, that means two words. His name is so holy that you can't tell it in one word, according to the Jews, the olden Jews, not the modern ones today. All these stories which are there of the flood is there in the Iluimish, the Atrahasis. Now you can see on the top right, there's a picture. These are the stones found in Iraq. These have the story of the flood, basically. And then you have the 12 tablets of the Gilgamesh tablets, which is there in the British Museum. All of these tell the story of the flood and the man who survived it. Okay, in some of the books, he was known as Utnapistu. In the Gilgamesh tablets, he was known as Utnapistu. In the Greek story of creation, he was known as Zeusudra. And in the Atrahasis, he's known as Atrahasis. He's the god Noah. Noah was known with different names in different places. We have 150 stories of Noah throughout the world. It's more than 150. In India, he was called Manu, but Manu can be also Moses, that we'll come to know later on. But the flood story is in India is attached to Manu. Like I said here, today archaeologists have found the Indus Valley scripts to resemble the Sumerian writing. The earliest mention of Noah's children in India is the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Esther and Shem and Ham is mentioned in that. And the Bible also mentions his grandson Ophir. That is where Solomon got his gold from. And it mentions the Solomon's mines there. Jainism mentions Rishabhadeva, who is the first Tirthankara and closely resembles the story of Noah. He too had 3 sons. His sons were known as Sharma, Mishra, and Japheth. These, you see, when stories go across continents, they change their language, their meanings are changed, the names are changed, and that's how most of the stories, when they pass from country to country, it changes the history. Though there are other books with different names, like in the Hindu literature, he's known, Shem is known as Bharatha, Ham was known as Bahubali, and the southern Tamil literature, like I said before, in the Sangam poetry, mentioned his sons as Kaman and Saman. Buddhism also had the memory of Shem as shaman. That means the Buddhists had two set of people. They were called the shamans and the Bhamans. Now the Bhamans were not Brahmins. So when I come to the chapter of Buddhism, I'll explain what does a shaman mean and a Bhaman means in Buddhism. The Sankam poetry was called Kankam in the beginning. Ham was known as Kam in India. I think I repeated this in my previous ones. Okay, this is a stone which is found in Indus Valley. And here you see a man sitting in a mudra. He has 2 faces. Basically, it's 4 face. We don't know if it is 4 face or 2 face. He's got a horn at the top and he's surrounded by animals. He's sitting on a throne, basically. Now, the Jains, they say that this is Rishabhadeva, their first Tirthankara. And the Buddhists say that this is their old Buddha, their Buddha, one of the 28 Buddhas. And because this is the sign in Buddhism too, remember this sign was taken and turned upside down to make Om. In Hinduism, there is Om. This was a sign which was used. If you turn it upside down. This was made into Om, but then I'll come to that later. And this is a man with two faces. But in Western theologists think this is none of what they say. This is the before that I'll tell you about Hinduism. Hinduism tells that this is Shiva sitting in the Nataraj position, basically. But at that time there was no mention of Shiva, because we all know that in the Rig Veda, the Athar Veda, the Yajur Veda, there is no mention of Shiva in that. Shiva is not mentioned until it comes to the Puranas. You don't have Shiva in the old Vedic books. He was not a Vedic god. So, but the Hindus, they attach their name everywhere. Wherever they see a stupa or this, they say it is Shiva. So they say it is Shiva. The Western theologians think this is an idolization of Noah, because Noah was always worshipped with two faces. I'll show you that before. Noah sitting, and Noah, for his love of animals, which he took and rescued on the boat, they show animals across. You see, animals are everywhere. But we don't know for sure what is this. This was a seal found in the Indus Valley. So we leave it to that, because this is just a guesswork for everyone. The presumption of the seal of the Indus Valley against Buddhists, Hindus, and Jews, like I just explained this thing. And these are some of the, see here on the right, you see Janus. This is the god Janus. Janus is no one but Noah. And Noah was worshipped as god Janus, basically. And I had mentioned that he comes from the mountain of Araras. That's why you have the Taurus Mountains. He is always shown with the horn because of the bull, the sign of the bull. Here I show some pictures of gods and leaders with horns. This is a Canaanite god with horns here. This is the second one is actually Moses with the horns. And I don't know if anyone knows why did Michelangelo make this statue of Moses with horn. There is a story in the Bible. Does anyone know that story about why Michelangelo gave this horns? Very interesting story, but it's only an imagination of Michelangelo. And here you have the Egyptian gods with their thorns. This all on the right side. This is the god Balkazar. He is the sign of the Pakistan ISA. If you see the ISA's emblem, you have this Balkazar. This is also the sign of the Masonites. The what do you call the group of Masonites? So I show some worship of gods with horns. History has always shown that the land of India was always occupied by others during various phases of life. The earliest Indians of cavemen must have walked or by water into the South India some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. These were the Kushites who moved to southern India, and some of them moved to the Kush Mountains, today we call the Hindu Kush Mountains, near modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan. That's the reason you call them the Hindu Kush Mountains, because of Kush. And I have explained that. Even Kashmir is under his name, Kushmir. Mir means a lake, Kush is Kush's name. The earliest settlements of North India were people who migrated east after the event of the Tower of Babel. We all know the story of the Tower of Babel, when God confused the language. People were spread across, and that's the time people went into China and India and everywhere. They just spread across because they couldn't understand the language, and they went into and formed different cultures and countries, basically. And I would call this the first phase of migration. There is a multiple phase of migration into India. India's history cannot be told in one sitting. India has a long history of foreigners, basically. We are all come from outside in India. There's no one who could say that India is their land. Even the Nagas, the Shudras, the everyone down south who call them Dravidians are also come from Africa. We are all from outside, basically. The earliest people knew the concept and the idea of making a boat. Remember, Noah and his kids, they basically survived the flood by making a boat. So naturally, his children knew how to make the boat and the wheel. Because today in modern history, if you Google it up and search, no one knows when the boat and the wheel was invented. These were inventions before the flood. Modern historians still today don't know when these two inventions were created. Most probably Noah's sons knew how to build a boat, and the wheel from the pre-flood times, and they taught their children this trade. I have a picture of a wheel found 500 miles down in a coal mine, by a coal digger. And you guess how did this wheel reach that depth? And they have said it is 5 million years old. I'll show you the photograph. This is a miner in a coal mine, which is 500 meters deep. And there you see that wheel there. How did this wheel get so below down? You can always get from my flood story, which I said how when God destroyed the earth, how the tectonic plates shifted and he rumbled everything. Everything was crushed. Remember what God said in the Bible? I will destroy the evidence that even man lived on the planet. That's what he mentioned in the Bible, and destroys everything. See, this is the wheel basically. So that gives you an idea of actually there was a flood, because when people say there was no flood, there are a lot of proofs of the flood. The chances are this was from the flood when the continents folded and destroyed the earth during Noah's flood. After the destruction of the civilization in Harappa sites, the people moved further down to India and became the inhabitants in this part of the world, which we call by different names today. India was called with different names, like I said before. It was called the land of Ophir in the Bible. The Bible also calls it Hud. Hud was just a name for Ethiopia, but in those days, any land across the land of Ethiopia, remember, everything was an unknown land in those days. Man did not populate the whole earth by that time. It still was taking time for Noah's children to fill up the earth. So no one knew what lied across the other side. So anything across Ethiopia was known as the land of Hud. In Sumerian, it was called Meluha, like I said. During Ashoka's time, Ashoka called it Jambudipa. You can hear this in a lot of Buddhist statues. The Persians called it Hindustan, and the Vedic language called it Bharata. The British gave it the name India. So when you say India, it's a very modern name. India goes back long days. India in those days was not a united country, but ruled by various tribes and kings. That's the reason Alexander refused to go deep into India. His army stopped him from going deep into India because of this very reason. He was not frightened of Porus or anyone. The reason that India was a very mystic land and it was ruled by different people, different cultures, and it was the land of magicians and pagans. Alexander did not want to take that risk, so he went back after he reached the borders of India. Different people and cultures called it with different names. And here I again repeat this. Everything is here. Sumerians, the Solomon called it, Ashoka called it, Hindu literature, British called it. Every tribe in India came from outside, rather than the common understanding that it was a westerly flow, rather than an easterly flow. Because many Hindus today in India, they make videos and WhatsApp university guys come up by saying that, oh, Indians went here and that's how that religion came there. Indians went to Indonesia and here, there. Of course, Buddhism went from India outside, but Hinduism rarely left India. And I'll cover that chapter. That's the reason you have Hindus only in India and no part of the world. Okay, from here, some facts I would like to say. The worshipping of, like I said showed in my previous presentation, how people were worshipping standing stones. And in the book of Isaiah, God clearly says, "Thou shalt not worship the standing stones." Those were the time of the pagans, and they started this worshipping of the snakes during the early periods. Evacuation north of Quetta in the Zob River basin has revealed evidence that the earliest civilizations of India were based on the mother goddess figure known to the Babylonians. That means India had some connection with Babylon. Even that time trade was going on. So when trade goes on between two countries, there's always exchange of ideas. Remember, there was no TVs, no books, and no video games. We did not have iPhones. So the only time pass people had was burning a fire and telling stories. And when stories are told, you add things to it, like the Chinese whisper, and the real story changes. That's how religion spread across continents by the story changing and the gods changing their forms and figures. The bull cult was featured in the Babylonian system. In India, the bull became identified with Omo and Osho. I will cover this later on, who is Omo and Osho. These are the Kushan gods. The Kushans were basically not Indian rulers. They were ruling in Bactria, but they ruled the whole of northern India at that time. The Kushan kings, I'm sure you might have heard in history who are the Kushan rulers. And this Omo, god Omo, actually becomes Shiva later on. And I'll show it to you how it is. Basically, who is this Omo? And Omo was an inspiration from the Greek gods Poseidon. And we'll get to that later on. Then later on, the Hindu formation was changed to Shiva and defined as Nandi, bearer of the god. Nandi was nothing but the reincarnation of the bull, which is worshipped as Baal in Babylon. The stone phallus was also found, which were used by the Buddhists as stumps. The Buddhists used to call it a stump, but this was all taken over later on by the Brahmins, and they made it into the Shivling. And that story too, like I said, the story of Hinduism, I will have to take two or three presentations. It's a huge presentation. And that's where you will come to know how these stumps become into the what do you call the worshipping of Shiva's stone. Later on in the British era, this association was called the phallus, the male part of the man. The phallus was also worshipped in many places because of fertility. You must have seen statues of gods with their breast open and men with their private parts. This was worshipped in olden time because fertility was worshipped in the olden days. The snake worship. Of course, the story of the snake comes, everyone knows, is the Garden of Eden, like Matthew asked in the starting, whereas the serpent tempts the Eve and God curses the Eve that the snake, that he will be all his life on the belly, rubbing on the belly, and he'll be crushed by the womb of the woman. That means the son who's born to a virgin will crush his head. That is, it talks about Jesus. But here I've given a small idea of how snakes are worshipped everywhere. This is not a phenomenon only to India. This basically is everywhere. It was in Mexico, it was in India, it was in Egypt, it was in Central Asia, it was in Europe and Americas. Everywhere they were worshipping the snake because the story of the Garden of Eden had spread throughout civilization, but in a different form. The far off lands heard the story, a distorted story. They made their own story, like how the Mexican Kuba Khan, this is the god Kuba Khan. And so everyone made their own stories. Even the Indian gets it from the Africans. The Africans walk in and they started worshipping. These snake worshippers today were later on called the Nagas. And I'll get to that. Here I show you an article which is there in the library of the US Congress. So this is not a myth and tale. This was printed during the 1850s. And this edition is kept in the US Library of Congress. So we are not just telling fairy tales. These are proof lying there. There's a lot of proofs of giants in Smithsonian, but the way science works today, like I said in my previous presentation, the archaeologists and scientists do not want to show anything which will prove the flood true, so that then gods, they don't want the biblical God's words to be true, so they hide the facts. So many things are hidden. Now come to the Nagas and Nakash. The Ethiopians ruled much of India. Those are Ham's children. And if you Google it and you feel what I'm showing here is wrong, you can basically do some research and you'll come to know that the Ethiopians used to rule a lot of southern India, basically. Ethiopians had a very intimate relation with Indians. In fact, the antiquity of the Ethiopians ruled much of India. These Ethiopians were called the Nagas. A reading of ancient Dravidian literature, which dates back to 500 BC, that's the Sangam poetry, gives us considerable information on the Nagas. In Indian tradition, the Nagas won central India from Vilavur, the bowmen, and the Minavars, the fishermen. There were two tribes initially. They were the Vilavars and the Minavars. Now, this is mentioned in the Sangam poetry. If anyone knows what is Sangam literature in South, they know it's the oldest literature in Tamil Nadu. It was a written in poetic way, and it does mention of Ham, his children, Ethiopia, about Kumarakundalam, that is the lost continent of in southern India, which we don't have it today, but they mention Kumarakundalam too. The Dravidian classic, the Chillapatakaram, this is a book, made it clear that the first great kingdom of India was Naganadu. Naganadu was nothing but Sri Lanka. That time it was not a separate country. Remember, the Indian Tamils were kings in northern part of Sri Lanka. The southern part was ruled by Sinhalese, who basically were the people who escaped after the Kalinga War of Ashoka. But that history we'll get to that later on. But Sri Lanka was known as Naganadu. The Nagas probably came from the Kush Punt Ethiopia. Ethiopia was also known as Kush Punt, the land of Kush and his son Punt. Remember when I was showing the sons of Noah, he has a grandson called Put. Put is nothing but Punt. Punt ruled Libya, basically. Kush was of Africa. So it was called the Kush Punt Ethiopia. It doesn't mean that they stuck in one place. In those days, Noah had asked his sons to go and spread the human race everywhere. So they would go across and capturing every place which they could in those days. In Sumerian texts, it is claimed that the Punites are nothing but Ethiopians, traded with the people of the Indus Valley or Dilmun. Dilmun is Bahrain today. According to S.N. Kramer, he's an author. You can look at his books. In the Sumerian part of Punt was probably called Meluha, and Dilmun was probably the ancient name of Indus Valley. Here he tells it opposite, but Dilmun was basically Bahrain, and Meluha was Indus. But there is a confusion between this because we don't know exactly. They know that where this area lies, but which was called Dilmun and which was called Meluha, there is a still debate going on. Today, some scholars maintain that Oman, where we find no ancient cities, was Dilmun, and the Indus Valley may have been Meluha. So there is a conflict there which is always going on because these things were not recorded fully. Ancient Ethiopian traditions support the rule of Puntites or the Ethiopians of India. In the Kebra Nagas, this is an Ethiopian book, which is a very old book of history. We find the mention of the Arve kings who ruled India. The founder of the dynasty was Zabezi Angabo. It's hard to pronounce the name, Angabo. He was a king, basically. He was ruling over India in those days. This was 1370 BC. Now, remember, we don't have any history of India till the 300 BC. And some of the information we know of 300 BC is because of Greek writers or not Indian writers. So we get most of our information of Alexander and all of them from Greek writers. And of course, Buddhist writers wrote their books only after the 2nd century, after they forming a Mahayana society and all that. I'll come to that when we go to Buddhism, how Buddhism, basically the religion changes when it comes to the 3rd century. The history of serpent worship. The earliest authentic record of serpent worship is to be found in the astronomy of the Chaldeans and China. I think everyone knows who are the Chaldeans. They were seafaring people. And China basically, so here I saw some pictures from China. This is a Sumerian god, Nigizada. Here you see the surrounded snake. This is basically from the Exodus. And you have their 2 gods holding on to that. The great dragon Enki feathered serpent was also called the morning star, according to Sumerians. We call the morning star as Satan, Lucifer, but that name Lucifer comes very late, inspired by the creation story in the Sumerian tales. So I just kept some pictures for you to see on this. The history of Naga worship in India. The worship of Naga seals and reptiles came to India and Sri Lanka while the migration of the Ham tribe from Africa. This would have been the same migration of the southern India population. And with them came the snake worship that originated in Syria and Sumerian civilization. Remember, in those days, there was no countries in those days. You just could move across anywhere. These tribes later on had their own kings and they formed the first dynasty. Thus, we have the Nagavanshi, the first Naga dynasty. Some of the earliest kings in India during the earlier Buddha time, before Gautama, were also Naga dynasty. Thus, Buddhism was intermingled with Naga worship. We have the seven-headed snake protecting Buddha. You must have seen a statue of Buddha sitting under seven heads above him. And that statue was also copied by the Buddhists, and they put, I think, Lord Vishnu or something they put instead of Buddha. But we'll come to the stories, and I'll cover that too, how it happened. These are some of the kings which had the many people in India, when we talk of Nagas, they think snakes. But Nagas were only a dynasty. They were kings who ruled. Now we have some of the great Naga kings. His name is Ananta, Vasuki, Shesha, Padma, Kambala, Kartaka, and Takshaka. This is as per Buddhist literature. They all ruled between 100 BC to 200 AD, between that time. And in the Hindu books, you have some additional names, Pingala and Kalyana. Hindu gods that they have taken it to, because we had a lot of kings. They were not the only kings. But these were some of the important kings, and I will explain to them why. Both the religions, that Buddhism and Hinduism, in the start incorporated this tribe into their beliefs so that the religion would get a vast coverage in the beginning. Yeah, of course, Buddhism and Hinduism took this into under their umbrella so that their religion would spread much further, so that the Nagas would also worship their religion. Basically, that was the intention in the starting. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata also calls the South Indians as the abode of Nagas. It calls it as Patal Loka. Now, let me tell you, in Buddhist literature, there is a Patal Lok also. But the Patal Lok, according to Buddhist literature, was the Afghanistan side. They call that the Patal Lok. But in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they call the Patal Lok as Kerala, basically southern India. There was no name, but southern India was known as the Patal Lok. That means the land of the underground, which you said. Their domain is enchanted underworld ground with gems, gold, and other earthly treasures called the Naga Loka and Patal Loka, which is the origin times for modern Pakistan. Also called Hyderabad, which was called Patalpuri. It was called Patalpuri in those days. Even like I said, in Kerala, there are temples which have snake worship in a well at the side of the temple. I'll show you the picture next. Some of the well-known temples in Kerala, Manaswara temple, Padmabhuka temple, Vetikod, Nagaraja temples. Now, well-known cities in India which are named after Nagas. Many people know Trivandrum, the name Trivandrum. Actually, it's not Trivandrum. It's Sri Anandapuram. Sri means, it's a word in Pali, is to give respect, like how you say Shri, lad. Ananda is the king, Ananda king. Anandapuram. That means Trivarandapuram is under his name. Trivarandapuram, Anandapuram. That means it is devoted to this snake god. Now you can understand Kerala's connection to snake worship. You have in Madras, Nagarcoil, is also snake worship. You have Nagapattanam. You have in Kashmir, Anantnag. This is named after the king Ananta. Nagavalli in Tamil Nadu. You have Nagpur, Sheshnag, Takshila. Now I'll tell you what many of us have heard of the Takshila University. This was named under the king Takshaka, Vaisavalia, this snake king. He was the one who ruled at that time over that area. But the Takshila was created after him. The Ishwaku dynasty, basically, they created Takshila. But it was made in the memory of this king, Takshaka, basically. Then you have Nagaland. So if you see, the whole of India is named after snakes in some or the other way. This is a pillar in I think this is in near Delhi or somewhere it is. No, it's in Allahabad. The Allahabad pillar inscription of the Gupta king Samudragupta states that he defeated Ganapati Naga. Now, I used to tell many people the word Ganapati, the god Ganapati is not Ganapati, it's something else. In the Gupta period, Ganapati means it's a tribe, Gana tribe. Pati means the king of the Gana tribe, Ganapati Naga. See, it is mentioned on this. stump itself. This suggests that the Ganapati Naga was the last Naga king. And after his defeat, the Naga territory was annexed by the Gupta empires. The Nagas become Gupta later on, basically. The Mauryas, they become the Mauryas and the Guptas, basically. It's the same Naga people. The inscription also mentioned two other rulers, Nagadatta and Nagasena, whose identity is not certain. According to Harsha Charitra, is the book which was written that time, Nagasena was a Naga ruler of the Padmavati. Padmavati is today modern day UP. But neither of these kings are attested by any coins. Okay, you can get to this, I can send these things. Here I mentioned how the worship was going on in Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia. The Semites believed that the snakes were immortals because they could indefinitely shed their skin and appear forever youthful. And that's the reason they used to worship it, because they had a charm in the snake. The snake would never get old, according to old mythology. The Sumerians called this god Ningashid Zida. Then you have the Greek god Medusa. You must have seen this, the god with all her hairs where the snakes come out. This is basically a Naga princess. The name was Medusa. And I don't want to go into the details of this. The Tamil literature, particularly these two literatures here, also mentions the Nagas, who are associated with serpent beings or mythical creatures with serpent characteristics. The earliest mention, like I said, it was in Naga, the Deccan. The Jaffna Peninsula, which I say Sri Lanka, was mentioned in the Tamil literature as Nakanadu, like I mentioned before. In Pali literature as Nagadipa. In Pali, everything was Deepa. Deepa means the ocean. Jambudipa, Nagadipa, and all that. In Greek, Gazetteer was known as Nagdipa. Let me go. This, I just show some pictures of snake worship around the world, in China, Egypt, everywhere. So this is not an Indian phenomenon of worshipping snakes. And there you see the last Satan giving the apple to Adam and Eve, basically the biblical story, the Genesis story. You have one more Genesis story here. Here you see Vishnu lying on the water. And when I come across the covering Hinduism, I'll tell you the real meaning of how they copied all this. What is the importance of the snake here? Now you understand why the snake is there above. But later on, I'll tell you why he lies on the water and who's this basically on the lotus too. The early dynasties in India. Now, there were many dynasties in India, but I'll just try to cover, just for time's sake, go run through many of them. You have the Maurya Vanshi, what you call the Maurya kings. You might have heard about Chandragupta Maurya and all that. They were peacock worshippers, basically. Maur means peacock. So they were the peacock worshippers. Then you have the Surya Vanshi, who used to worship the sun. Basically, this dynasty comes from Egypt after the king Akhenaten. If anyone knows the story of Akhenaten, how he threw away all the Egyptian gods and he started worshipping the sun and called it the one only God, Akhenaten. So basically, this comes from Egypt, and that's the way we have a lot of people from Egypt here, like the Mishras and all that. They come from Misr. Misr was the old name for Egypt. That's why I call them Mishras and all that. That I'll explain when we come to that chapter. Then you have the Chandravanshi, the moon worshipper. This is also a big worship in Central Asia, in Mesopotamia, and how the moon was worshipped. These two does reverse. Basically, Surya is the male and the moon is the female. But in parts of Arabia, moon is the male and Surya is the female. And I'm not confusing people, but I'll get back to that later on. The Gupta Vanshi is the Garuda bird. Gupta is the Garuda bird. They had their own dynasty. And then you have the Naga Vanshi, who was to worship the snakes. There were many other Vanshi. You had Ishkavu, Satyavan Vanshi. But I'm not getting into all that. But these were the most important ones who we had here. See, here I have put that Warrior Alden, who is the anthropologist, mentions in his book that Nag means human. Even in the Pali language, it means human. Nag doesn't mean snakes in India. In Indian, it means human. I am just covering here a little bit of the Nagavanshi dynasty, who ruled, like I said, Shesha. Ananta, this is the same name of both the person. He was known also as the Sheshnag. You might have heard people saying Sheshnag. I'm worshipping the Sheshnag. They're the same names for Ananta and Shesha. These were all brothers. Shesha, Ananta, Vasuki, Manasa, and Takshala were all brothers. They were all not different, but they ruled different areas, basically. His rule was in Videsha, which was in MP. The name means outsider. The name Videsha today. Then you have Vasuki. Now, this is very interesting. Vasuki was a very powerful, was a very powerful king, and he was also very tyrant ruler. And he's known as the king of snakes. The biggest snake is always shown as Vasuki snake. They will always depict the giant snake with Vasuki's name. If you Google it, you'll come to know what is a Vasuki snake. But he was basically not a snake. He was a person, and I'll go into little depth there before. Manasa was another king, and Takshala, like I said, he was a powerful Naga mentioned in the Mahabharata. He is known for killing Parhe. These were all stories made by the Hindus, but he was a Buddhist. He was a Naga king. He was not a Hindu, and a descendant of the Pandavas. By biting, the Hindus actually basically tried to join everyone with everyone to give a little bit historical evidence to their books, and that's how they incorporate all these Buddhist and Naga kings into their stories. Like I said, Takshila is named after the Naga king Takshaka from the Ishwaku dynasty. Basically, this Ishwaku later on becomes the Satyavan dynasty and all that, who rules the southern India. They also broke up into Vatakasa. I don't want to go into details. There are many dynasties in India. They were the 5 kings who were the mightiest among all. That's why they say Panchanami. You must have heard Nag Panchami. It is the worship of the 5 snake kings. It is not worship of the snake. Today in India, they have made it as the snake worship. Initially, it was the worship of the 5 kings, the Panchamukhi in Buddhism. They call it the 5 kings. The Naga kings also called the Panch. 5 Panch is 5 in Pali. So we say Panchanami, we say. The festival is called Panchanami. This is Sheshnag. I just made a small article on Sheshnag. This was the coins of Sheshnaga. His original name is Raja Shesh Dagnath. Now his name is, this is a pure name mentioned in the carvings. Raja Shesh Dagnath. He ruled between 110 BC to 90 BC. Now all they were brothers, so they are between the same time. We get his names from the coins in the British Museum. Here you see a statue in Gandhara where Sheshnag is sitting with his wife and his consort. Basically, you see him sitting. He's a man, he's a king. Here, this is a pillar in Sachi. It shows Raja Sheshnag. This is Raja Sheshnag with all the cobra heads on top. And he is meeting Ashoka in a discussion. This is Emperor Ashoka. This is there in Sachi, in Odisha. And here it clearly shows with Sheshnag. Now, looking at this, you can clearly figure out that Sheshnag was a real king. We are not talking mythology here. We are talking of a real king, but he was from that dynasty. And below you see the Sheshnag is also shown as a serpent with a harp. There was no real man with a serpent. These are all imaginations and creations because they were snake worshippers. Vasuki, I said he was a terrible king. He ruled at the same time, but he ruled in the Gujarat area, which you call Saurashtra and Kathiawadi today. He is the same snake which is shown in the Samudra Manthan. Most of you will not know what is Samudra Manthan. I'll cover it later on. It is, if it's a Hindu, they'll know what is it. It's called the churning of the ocean, and the ocean becomes milk as per their Hindu mythology. And this is the mountain under which it was done, according to Hindus. Now, this is a snake shown with the 5 kings kingdom. Basically, it should be 5 here in this photo. There are many. The 5 kings resembles the home kingdom of the 5 kings. And this was known as Bambi. Bambi means in Buddhism, this means the abode of the 5 kings. And always the cobra is protecting the 5 kings. Oh, I forgot one thing. Vasuki's real name was Indunath. Just for your reference, though his name is called Vasuki Nag, his real name on inscription is Indunath. Here I just put some cuttings from the books which I have read. I just want, this is on Takshat. He ruled the area of Takshila and Sialkot. Sialkot is in Pakistan. His real name was Tak Mori. Tak Mori was his real name. Takshat is the book name mentioned in these inscriptions. Basically, I just want to read one line here. भारत के प्राचीन आदिवासी लोगों में टोटम था. तक्ष और नाग लोग नागों की पूजा करते थे तथा कभी कभार विशेष अवसरों पर कृत्रिम कृत्रिम खोबरा फन का सिर पर पहनते थे. दैट मीन्स टू वेयर इट ऑन द हेड. इसी कारण ये लोग नाग कहलाते थे. ये नाग मूल रूप से उत्तर पंजाब अत्यंत सिंध घाटी के निवासी थे. दैट मीन्स ही इज सेइंग दैट दे वर primarily from the Punjab and the Sindh Ghati. Okay, my reading of Hindi is a little bad. I've been so long out of India. So just here I am mentioning the Indian Naga tribes. The main tribes of the Nagas were called the Chair tribe. Now, there were many other tribes, but I am concentrated on the Chair tribe because they were spread across southern India and northern India. The Chair tribe ruled much over northern India and southern India, was called the Northern Indian Territory of Cherrapunji. I don't know how many of you have heard of Cherrapunji in Assam. It receives the highest rainfall in the world. That is called Cherrapunji. It is named after the Chera tribes. They used to stuff their dead kings into hollow trees as a ceremony in memory of the snakes hiding in tree holes. They had a practice that whenever their king dies, they used to bury the king in a hollow tree and then put the tree away. Kavirapatnam is in Tamil Nadu, was an ancient city of the Nagas. And then you have Kerala. Kerala comes from the name Cher. They have the Cher tribes in Kerala. That's why you have, it was initially called Cheralam, after the Cheras used to rule, Cheras and the Pandyas, but they take their name from the Cher tribes who are Naga worshippers. They become Cheralam. Cheralam becomes Keralam later on. In Gujarat also the Chaurat tribe, they were the Chaurat tribes who were also from the Chera tribe and they later became the Rajputs. They also spread to Sri Lanka, which I said before, and it was called Naganadu. And this, I just showed a small map here of the Naga kingdom in those days. Their main kingdom was Padmavati, which is near modern day Madhya Pradesh, Kantipura, which is Uttar Pradesh, and Mathura. We all know where is Mathura in Uttar Pradesh. So these were their main areas of rule at those. And I think I mentioned Pataloka. I don't need to go over this. Kerala was also known as the Kere type. This part of the world, they are snake worshippers and so and so. Tamilakam also were the Pandalam kingdom and the Zamuris of Calicut. They were all snake worshippers. Here I show some pictures of the Kerala temples where they still worship the snakes. Though they have different gods in the temple, but outside the temple, they have all these statues. They have kept today. They try to hide these, but in Kerala they don't. But many temples try to hide the proof that they were all Naga worshippers before. I took my reference from some of these books. One of these book is प्राचीन भारत के शासन में उनके उत्पत्ति और इतिहास. This is a very good book. There's another one, भारत के आदिवासी नाग सभ्यता. Then I've got this downloaded book of Alexander Cunningham of Survey of India. This is a very good book if anyone wants to read. And I've got this also, The Curse of Ham, which India gives a lot of history. There's another book I took it. It's an Indian book. It was written in English. It was not an Indian book. It was written by a Britisher. It was written in the British time. It's called India of the Dark Ages. Very interesting book. Very interesting. It tells you things which you don't know what happened in the Dark Ages of India. And my next presentation would be on the Jains and the Buddhism. Basically, I would want to cover how the story of Noah and his children get into a little bit of Jains. Buddhism doesn't have much to hook on to with Noah's tales other than just a guesswork that Shem's name is Shaman. But there is no real, because they don't have the early history of the early Buddhists. Ashoka had mentioned only 7 Buddhas in his pillar, Ashoka pillar. He mentions 7 Buddhas' names before Gautam Buddha. But what happens to the earlier 15 Buddhas, we don't know. There is no history of them, though in the Tripitaka they mention all the names of the 28 Buddhas coming to Gautam Buddha, but that might be a creation. We all know how things are created in religion, so we don't know what is the thing. And okay, and that was my last. If anyone, I just wanted to keep it short. I don't know how much time we have made. Oh, we have still crossed an hour. I tried to keep it within an hour. I hope you guys liked it. And if anyone has something, we can surely, at least we got some 5-10 minutes to just discuss something.
I mean, it was very interesting because, ultimately, I've heard whatever you said. Like, when you see the Nagin web series, most of those are Nag Deva and all this thing. Most of names are in that web series. So, I'm just trying to understand how these connections were made actually. So
Yeah,
it really
yeah.
helped,
They
helped
were
a lot.
all religious beliefs. They were snake worshippers, but our Hindi films take it to an extent
Correct.
of making that they become into a snake and they go, you hit the story. There was a very famous story of, it is in Manipal,
Mhm.
where a snake goes and bites one girl's whole family. And then the girl keeps crying, and the cobra comes and asks her, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "You killed my whole family." And the snake says that they killed his Nagin, his
Yeah.
partner. And
Mhm.
then she goes and says, "How can I bring my dead back to life?" And the snake cobra tells him that you have to worship me and my wife. That's the Nag and the Nagin. And then we will take the sharp away from you. So that is a fairy tale, a story cooked in that part of the world, and that thing is today taken into films also, in that Nagin film and all that. No, तूने
Yeah.
इसको डसा वो आया उठाया and all that.
Mhm.
That is those stories made very later on. But
Right,
this is
right,
the real story of the dynasty. They were simple humans like you and me. The only thing, they were worshipping snakes, like how
Josh,
some
keep
people
your chicken inside, na?
worship. Pardon me, I didn't hear. Who's that? Louis, you said something?
No, good presentation, laddie. Just, I think this covered. I mean, that obviously, like you said, right? Hinduism to cover. It's a long presentation.
Yeah, Hinduism is a long subject. If I
Yeah.
can't cover it in one coverage, there's a lot of information there.
Yeah. But surprisingly, all these have the same concept of Trinity. That Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara.
It's very interesting. Good you ask this question, but I don't want to break the suspense now as to how. See, Hinduism is not one set of religion. We don't call it a religion. It's a set of different ideas with different
It's a way
people
of
at
life.
different times.
Yeah.
Everything was written in different periods, different times, with different things in mind.
Right. And
That's
part of the
why the
confusion is
word
their
Hinduism is
characters. Are
not there.
they?
Very
Yeah.
interestingly, the word Hinduism is not there in our Indian constitution. Baba Sahib Ambedkar did not put the word Hinduism in the constitution. Do you know that?
No.
Yeah.
Did he use?
The word Hinduism is not there in the constitution because Baba Sahib himself said that this is not a religion. And for that, all the leaders were against Baba Sahib Ambedkar.
Good. Yeah. It will be interesting to cover that. Yeah.
Yeah, what is the Trinity in Hindus? What do you call Brahma and
Brahma, Vishnu,
Brahma,
Mahesh.
Vishnu, Maheshwara. Yeah, the three.
But
The
you
Brahma?
creator,
shocked to know who
preserver,
is
and
the real
destroyer.
Maheshwara and who is the Vishnu and who is the Brahma. I will cover that. It will be very interesting to know who actually are Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh.
Okay, Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh.
Laddie, you should stop the recording now.
Okay.
Yeah, but interestingly, they are